Maybe you could just tell us when's the report coming out? Is it the next few weeks?
Okay, so we are finalizing all aspects of our executive summary in the second week of February, and after that, it will be released as quickly as possible. We have a, maybe Kat and Michael can speak to the rollout process, which we want to, before publicly releasing the documents, make sure that everybody's not surprised by what's in them. And I want to point out that some of the other products which are listed up there, there's some foundational science pieces, and there's some technical guidance documents, and some of those are already available. But it's the executive summary that I think is going to be really interesting to you all. So,
thank you very much for your presentation. Do you want to ask her specific questions, or should we bring up Kat, have them both sit there and then open it up for questions to either one of them? They're both scientists. Is that okay? Thank you very much. So if you don't, you can stay put, or you can join us later on, whatever you'd like. So Catherine Coleman from the Ocean Protection Council, thank you very much for coming, and thank you for your good work at the OPC.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's a pleasure to be here. And I want to get this organized. I want to give you some ideas about what we've been hearing from the panel, what the managers have been hearing from the panel, and sort of, I think, in some measure, tease you with some things that are going to be coming that are actionable. At this point, the scientists are a little nervous about it because they're still going through their process, but we felt that it was important to share with you some of the things that are happening, are occurring, that not only are people doing right now, but that are actionable, we can build on them for being more responsive to the problem at hand. So I think one of the main points I want to leave you with is that we have stood up a framework in California and the West Coast to deal with ocean acidification and hypoxia. So we've stood up this this panel of scientists that covers all the way into British Columbia. And that's been important because it's allowed us to have a conversation across silos and have really allowed us to advance a conversation with our political allies and friends in the states of Oregon, Washington, and in British Columbia. And with that, then, we've also set up a process on the political side, which is through the Pacific Coast Collaborative, which is a West Coast group of leaders that works on climate and energy issues, and they asked us to have an ocean acidification sub-panel as part of that group. So we have a panel of scientists who are going to deliver actionable actions to us, and we also then have a suite of people who work for the governors and governors' offices and resources to uptake those and to turn them into actionable things that people can do now. And just, again, one of the things that the panel has said to us is they've really, really emphasized that it was the individual work that the states are doing is hugely important, but we really need to be focusing both at the California current level, which is the West Coast scale, but we also need to be engaging our federal partners. And we have spent time back in Washington with both NOAA and US EPA and been very warmly received. So in some measure, they are looking to the OPC, they're looking to the West Coast to help organize and bring good science and good policy to bear that will help guide national policy. So single state efforts will continue. We're going to continue at the West Coast level and continue to engage with our federal partners. Okay, so I'm going to go through this, and Allie hit this. So 6 findings, state of knowledge, 8 recommendations, what the heck we can do, 17 action items of what we can do now, and then appendices. Allie was looking for this, and there it is. She summarizes very nicely of what the 6 big, yeah, and the last one, which is probably the most important, is there is a cost to not taking action now. Okay. 8 recommendations. Those that they really focus on what are the local factors that things we can do to reduce OAH exposure at a local level, how we can enhance our management structure to help biota, fish shellfish to better cope with the stress, and then to expand the knowledge. So diving down a little deeper, acting locally. So if you've been following the discussion on ocean acidification closely, I think there is a desire to just jump to the nutrients and go deal with nutrients. There's a desire to just go do that. And what we've heard back from the scientists pretty clearly is we should be taking a meta step. And the meta step should be, the ocean isn't evenly acidic. Embayments and bays are not evenly acidic. So where do we have the biggest areas of stress? Where, because of the oceanographic influences as well as local inputs, where are the places where there are significant things we can do from land beyond not driving our cars or taking airplanes? What else can we do? And so there's a meta step there that is, I think, really important, which is to figure out how and then do a study of where it is most important and we can be most effective in attacking land-based pollution. Where are those places? We have the regulatory programs in place to deal with land-based pollution should ocean acidification show itself as a problem that would be amenable to permitting. But at this point, we really need to figure out where are those places on our coast and up and down the coast that are most vulnerable to acidification and most vulnerable to acidification from land-based sources. Part of that then is also in continuing to improve the predictive models that we have. The Ocean Protection Council invested in a large model that is being worked through at UCLA, and NOAA has bought onto that in a pretty big way. And what we're really, sort of the thrust of that is in Southern California, we have a huge number of wastewater treatment plants that are doing very well at secondary treatment, but a huge. Now, if you were to say ocean acidification is being made worse by those treatment plants, that's a huge investment. But if the science says that isn't a problem, then we can go spend our dollars in some other way more effectively. So we've got a model, and we're linking it up with NOAA, and we're hoping we start getting some answers in. So this kind of predictive modeling, some of it's going on. It's going to be needed to be built on in the future. Another place where we need to act locally is to promote approaches that remove CO2 from water. And you know, we have a number in California, a number of projects going on for eelgrass and for wetland restoration. And there's a body of science that is emerging that says that those kinds of restoration projects are really important for sequestering carbon, as well as they may also be effective in sweetening the water. And so Prop 1, Prop 84, there's been a lot of work, but we need to move the science needle to say, again, how much are these? Are these useful tools in sequestering carbon for the state? Are these useful tools for ensuring that Dungeness crab can continue to survive in an embayment because it has a good seagrass bed? Another recommendation is to reduce stressors on ecosystem, and this is, from pollution, as well as to look at how we're managing our fisheries. And then finally, we need to expand our knowledge. As everyone has been saying, there's still a lot more that we need to learn. I think one of the key figures for me is that 75% of the science that has been published on ocean acidification has been published in the last 10 years. So it's new, it's burgeoning, we need to do some more investment. So I wanted to just hit a bit on it because we get all really quite doom and gloom on this. But I'm really struck by the success story that we had in Washington and Oregon around shellfish larvae, that they saw that the spat weren't able to thrive and land. And so they spent a fair amount of money, and they being the federal government, state government, and industry, and they narrowed it down to what needed to be fixed was like a couple-day range of when the larvae were at a certain age. And by shutting off the seawater intakes, adding antacids, big vat of Tums, into the larvae water, the larvae are able to survive and then be released back out into the environment. So by having knowledge and applying that knowledge, a problem was solved. And I think it's a pretty wonderful success story that involved the community, it involved the industry, and it involved government and scientists. So today, I want to thank you for having this panel. The time is right. We're going to have a panel delivering some actions. Those actions are going to need to be translated into actionable things. So I call it a roadmap of, so we say, get that, if the action item is to do a vulnerability study, well, how do you do that? Who would do it? Where does the money come from? How do we, in a year from now, be launched on doing that action item? So that roadmap is what needs to be done next. So we're going to get the products from the scientists, they'll get translated, and hopefully we'll have some ideas there for legislative guidance for helping the state government, the regulatory agencies, the science agencies to help move to action. So I just want to thank you all. It's been a pleasure to serve on the Ocean Protection Council, and this has been a defining issue for certainly my term for getting this work done, and I'm very proud of the work that has been done, and so thank you very much.
Thank you for your good work, Kat. We wish you well in all future endeavors. So let's open it up for questions from members to either or both. Senator Monning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you both for your work and for being here. Looks like there's strong partnerships in the Pacific Northwest in British Columbia. Any work with Mexico or Latin American partners?
I've approached colleagues in Mexico, and there is a strong partnership that maybe Ali can talk about at the science level. There is, I think, an opportunity at the governmental level to really formulate something with Mexico, and just haven't been able to really connect with who are the right people to make that so. But I know on the science side, there's been a tremendous amount of interaction.
And you'll be probably going back.
Yes, so on the government side, we would like to be part of that, building that relationship. I was part of a Senate delegation to Mexico last July. The primary focus of that was greenhouse gas emissions and looking at partnerships. Education was a big part as well. But there's a keen interest in the political counterparts we met with, so I think expanding that conversation would be important and timely. So look forward to working with you on that. Thanks.
Any other questions by members? Senator Stone?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for your presentations. I appreciate it. You mentioned, Dr. Bain, that Dr. Fee was on one of those committees, and it was also mentioned that we've only been really comprehensively researching this issue for 10 years, and we have millions of years of history that unfortunately we don't know, trends analysis and things like that. But Dr. Fee was criticized, that he only used data from 1988 beyond, and I can tell you as a scientist, we've had pH meters for a lot longer than before or than after 1988, and it's my understanding that many of his colleagues called his study not just not accurate, but actually fraudulent. And it's not my words, this is cohorts, colleagues. And so how do you respond to that we have this gentleman on the panel that had a study that was considered fraudulent? And then one other issue before she answers the question, Madam Chair, I think it's really important, and I really learned a lot here today, and I really appreciate you all being here, but Madam Chairman, I would appreciate in the future that we have, balanced hearings so that we hear from people like this that have scientific evidence purporting their point of view, but I think we ought to hear from the other side as well so we can be able to fully articulate and ascertain all the information. I think somebody from the San Diego Scripps Oceanography that did this study that showed pH levels very naturally throughout the world, depending on the month, the time, the location. It would just, I think, go a long ways to doing a balanced presentation. And then also, we talk about pH and shellfish. How is it that in volcanic regions where you have pHs that are less than 7.8, that shellfish are thriving? And again, I mentioned the Scottish rivers that be less than 5. I mean, that's acidic, okay? No doubt about it. And the shellfish thrive. So I was wondering if you could just respond to those questions.
Well, I think going backwards for the last question, I think it has to do with adapting and the organisms that live next to those hydrothermal vents or volcanic locations underwater have adapted over many, many years to those conditions. Going back to the pH probe question, you're right, we've been able to measure pH for a long time, but the issue is the precision of those measurements and also the ability to measure pH in seawater. Regarding Richard Feely, I mean, he is a very well-regarded scientist, and even, in the lawsuit that was against EPA for 303D listing waters in Washington for pH, they determined that pH measurements couldn't even be submitted to the court as evidence from that long ago because they're so unreliable. So I think all scientists are criticized by our colleagues. It's the nature of the profession. So I would say the best scientists in the world are criticized for new ideas, and that doesn't mean that he's not a great scientist and that his work isn't valid.
And there's two more follow-ups and I'm finished. I talked about overfishing, and there's been evidence throughout the world that pteropod, which is a main feeding source for whales and other fish, because of overfishing, that you see pteropod levels declining. So is there any possibility that the lack of a shell exoskeleton, if you will, might be the result of lack of getting to maturation, number one? And number two, and that'll be my final question, is that we pride ourselves in the United States of having important sewage release treatment plants going. Of course, everything ends up back in the ocean. But you have countries like China that I'll guarantee you are not as sophisticated as we are in the United States, and probably many other unindustrialized nations that put raw sewage into the ocean in large amounts. So I would love to see.
Thank you for the questions. So regarding the pteropods, there's been a lot of experiments both in the field and the laboratory to confirm that the shell forming issue can be a result of acidification. So perhaps there are other things that contribute as well, but I feel like the evidence is pretty solid, and that's not my specific research area, so I've had to be convinced, and I was
may be, but not
convinced.
the only source of
And then the other question about sewage, the effects of nutrient pollution are localized. So that's a situation where a local action, the local discharges of nutrients are going to affect pH and aragonite saturation locally. So it wouldn't necessarily matter that China is releasing raw sewage, but certainly along their coastline that could have an impact on pH. And there are, like I mentioned in my presentation here, that there are some studies showing that the Yangtze River is causing lower pH than would be expected from just climate change because of the nutrient pollution in that river in China. So
I think it's something else that they'll look at more closely too, because it's just not China. Many other
Africa,
large populated industrialized
exactly.
nations are contributing, I would suggest. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you. And I want to thank you both for your presentations. We have about 5 minutes, so I thought there might be a few people, public comments, and then unfortunately we have session coming up. We look forward to the report. Senator Stone, I think if there's actionable items that result in legislation, of course, there would be a balanced opportunity for people to present all different opinions on that legislation. But I thought it was a great first hearing. I want to thank all three of the speakers, particularly the last two who have spent years studying this phenomenon. When I went to an oceans summit back in Washington, D.C. several years ago, it was one of the top topics, not only for the Northwest area, but Chesapeake Bay, and the list goes on and on around the world. So excellent work. Thank you both. So audience, public comments, does anyone wish to real briefly, because of time maybe, how many people really want to say something on this topic? 2 or 3. So 2 minutes each, and we probably won't be asking questions, but a statement or would be welcome.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chairman. My name is Juan Altamirano. I'm with Audubon, California. And the thing that I would like to concentrate specifically on is eelgrass. Eelgrass is one of the rarest habitats in California. Just 5 bays, Humboldt, San Francisco, San Diego, Mission, and Tamales, support more than 80% of the known eelgrass in the state. Eelgrass has declined in California, making any continuing or additional loss of this type of habitat an increasingly important part of any cumulative impacts throughout the state. Many species are dependent on eelgrass that are highly migratory. If these migratory species are adversely impacted by the continuing loss of habitat around the state, the effects will be seen throughout California's coast and beyond. We believe that the uneven distribution of eelgrass resources increases the risk of habitat loss and contributes to a loss of a dynamic future in nature. Moreover, the narrow depth range in which eelgrass can occur further places habitat at risk in the face of climate change and projected sea level rise. Eelgrass is highly productive and is considered to be a foundation of habitat-forming plant species. Eelgrass contributes to ecosystem functions at multiple levels, and as a primary and secondary producer, habitat structuring element, substrate for a number of nutrient stabilizers and cycling facilitators. Eelgrass also provides important foraging areas and shelter to young fish and invertebrates, food for migratory waterfowl and sea turtles, and spawning surfaces for invertebrates and fish such as Pacific herring. So we acknowledge and we support the notion of increasing and having a more robust, eelgrass component in helping to fight climate change. Thank you.
And it helps with resiliency as well for coastal protection.
Hi, Richard Sadowski. I'm a citizen of Morro Bay. Also, I sit on the Morro Bay Planning Commission. I'd like to kind of echo a little bit what a gentleman that said about eelgrass. We have a state marine reserve that has, we have an eelgrass issues during our planning commissions. We're continually trying to deal with this, and a lot of that science and a lot of those costs go to the leaseholders that are in the Tidelands lease grant. And we need to have some kind of a means to address that, maybe have an eelgrass bank. And the science, when we were talking about a particular project one time, that the science is showing that the back bay of, for instance, our bay does not support eelgrass. Well, I would like to respectfully disagree with you on the sewage issues. I'm also a wastewater collection system operator, and one of the key issues that we have is we have a revolving door policy for waivers. These, like Morro Bay and other areas where we have outfalls and we're dumping sewage, less than secondary treated. And we need to address those issues because the ocean acidification issue, this is an issue that, you have too many variables, not enough equations. And so we have to take those things in consideration and take in a more holistic approach. And I fully support the legislature to not only move in the direction, but also connect and have oversight and interaction with local government, because a lot of times the local government, there's a disconnect, and we need to have Sacramento engaged at a local level. And I would strongly recommend that the legislature move on this for our grandkids' sake, looking at it from those eyes.
Thank you for your passion and interest in this topic. Yes.
Good morning. Tom
Last
Raftigan
speaker.
from the Sport Fishing Conservancy. And I sat in the Marine Fish Advisory Committee to the Secretary of Commerce when the Oregon shellfish problem arose. It is serious, and this is a real issue. And I'd like to thank you for teeing it up with the legislature. It's important. I'd also like to thank the Ocean Science Trust for taking this on and putting it up on center stage. It's something we're going to have to deal with down the line in the future. The sport fishing community looks forward to helping out wherever we can. And I'd also like to thank Kat and the folks for putting on some of the positive alternatives to this, that there actually are some solutions that we can take on immediately. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. Okay. And then we have this thing called session.
Very briefly, Marla Jo Bruton Sadowski, and I'm from North Morro Bay. I'm just wanting to make sure that you know that members of the general public are here, have traveled to this meeting, and that this topic is extremely important to us. And also that I feel a little better today because I'm going, how do we educate? How do we bring this where people are talking in the park, on the bus? It's, you know, a little bit of talking about ocean acidification and hypoxia. First, we have to change the label. But I just wanted to let you guys know that there are people out here ready to do whatever it takes to take it to local levels, and we appreciate very much that you are discussing this today.
Thank you very
That's it.
much
Thanks.
for continuing outreach into 1,100 miles of coastline is incredibly important. So with that, I want to thank you all for your attendance, especially the 3 primary speakers and those who came up afterwards offering their own comments. Thank you for those of you who drove several hours to get here. Really important. This is the beginning, not the end. I think the report may trigger some additional discussion and hearings this year. So have a good afternoon. Meeting's adjourned.